Welcome to Laguna Podcast, an attempt at illustrating the lives and stories from the Texas outdoors. Today I sit down with a man who from a very early age saw conservation as a viable tool for the future, and now maintains it as a constant. This is my conversation with Brian Donovan. I'm ready to start whenever you are.
Hit it.
Cool. All right, so I got Brian Donovan in the chair, and I think this one's going to be really fun because of the stuff that we had talked about beforehand, even though we had mentioned that since January, some of the things haven't really been going on, but I think it's an issue that would be fun to discuss either way. Before we get started with the first question, do you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Brian Donovan, and
Here, try to speak a little closer to the microphone.
My name is Brian Donovan, and I'm from Rockport, Texas, and moved down here to kind of, help be in the middle of more of the conservation thing that I love about Texas. And so it was when the opportunity presented itself for us to come down here full time, I didn't hesitate.
Where were you before?
We're from Dallas.
Dallas. Nice. Cool.
Yeah, it's good to be gone. Every time I drive back through, it still stresses me out.
I have to be in Houston in 2 days, so that's going to be fun.
Yeah. Oh, man.
All right. Well, then, but we won't really touch on that. I want to start with just you as an individual first. Like always, run me through the very first memory you have in the outdoors up until maybe when you started getting into conservation and stuff like that.
Man, I think the earliest memory I have of the outdoors is I lived in Georgia when I was very young, and I'm probably 4 or 5 years old. And we lived kind of in a rural area north of Atlanta. And at the end of our street, you could just walk off into a field and start quail hunting. And it is following my dad around with not even a Red Ryder BB gun, the one that's even smaller than that wouldn't even break the skin if you shot yourself with it. And there was a buzzard in the air, and I was cracking off shots at this buzzard 100 yards away with this 50 foot per second BB gun. And hey, Dad, did I get him? Every time that buzzard would dip, did I get him? Oh yeah, son, I think you got him good. I think that's probably the first time that I remember being outside. But I mean, I had a gun in my hand since I was old enough to hold one. And then we moved to Texas when I was 10, and I grew up in Plano, Texas at a time when you could just walk out the back door with a 410 and wait till the back porch light came on to come back. And, we killed quail out there. We jump shot ducks. And I was back up. I was 7 when we moved there. I was 10 when I went on my first duck hunt. And was taken on my first duck hunt by a guy named Jeff Birmingham, who lives in Houston, and his father James was the captain out on Matagorda Island, and we used to get to take the state boat over to Matagorda Island and stay in the station with the wardens and hunt a pond right there, right by the lighthouse called Lighthouse Pond that nobody was allowed to hunt but us, and so it was like having Matagorda Island as your private duck club, and so it was a very Huck Finn type of experience when I was young, and getting to hang out with those younger game wardens, those guys that were probably in their 20s and 30s that they're just a year or two removed from the redfish wars. We've just gotten HB 1000. Redfish have just gotten game fish status. And the first time that I ever saw a night vision scope was out on Matagorda Island, and they handed me a thing about the size of a thermos that was about as heavy as a 10-year-old could hold up. And we'd watch deer out on the runway there by the warden station and everything. But what they had originally used that for is they would, whoever drew the short straw, they'd drop him off in the middle of the bay at 1 o'clock in the morning with this thing, and his ass would just stand there until one of the gill netters showed up because they were still illegally gill netting. And once somebody showed up, they would, they would call that in, and now you get a gunfight across the bay. I mean, those guys had some just absolutely Wild West stories of what it was like during the Redfish Wars and immediately after the passage of HB 1000, getting the enforcement, because there were still a lot of outlaws out there that were not going to be told that they couldn't gill net redfish. And so I know Chuck talked about it with you. And he was integral to, the foundation of the modern conservation movement here on the coast. And, Flatsworthy still does good work with like boating etiquette and all of that, which is another thing that people need to be more involved in.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And I do definitely want you to have some of those stories in your back pocket for later. 'Cause I still want to kind of finish your introduction and stuff like that.
Sure.
This episode is made possible by our friends over at Gordy & Sons Outfitters, located in Houston, Texas, and employing a team of experienced outdoorsmen specializing in fly fishing, hunting, and wing shooting. Gordy & Sons is sure to prepare you for success in the outdoors. Next time you find yourself prepping for a weekend getaway or a bucket list trip, be sure to give them a shout. But this whole time, you were just strictly hunting? You weren't really holding a fishing rod?
Well, so yeah, I was doing a little, kind of brim jerking in Georgia, and did a little bass fishing on Caddo Lake when I was younger. And I really, when we would go to Matagorda Island, we would hunt in the morning, and in the afternoon there was a rickety pier that OSHA would have dynamited if they saw it. I mean, this thing was 80% into the ocean, held together with linoleum and staples. I mean, it was a shit box. And we would go, it didn't even connect to the beachfront. You had to walk out about knee deep on an adult and then hop up a few feet to get on this thing and then start walking out. And then you could just we would just pitch dead shrimp out in the second gut while the men napped and I minded the rods. And we would catch a lot of redfish in the surf. And that, those first redfish that I caught, that's what hooked me on that fish. And I'm a redfish guy to this day. It's not that I have anything against trout or anything. I just, I like the interactivity.
The character.
Yeah, the character of that fish, the way that you can chase them in really shallow water. And there's something about the redfish's personality that I really love.
Yeah, I don't disagree there at all. So you think from those first couple of times you were fishing for those redfish in the surf, that's kind of when you kind of got hooked by it, and that's kind of what led to the snowball effect of you being so conservation heavy? Or was there a moment where you started realizing like, hey, like this is more than a hobby, it's becoming a passion, and there's a problem that I could at least be a help to?
So two things were going on there in that kind of 10 to 13-year-old range. One, I was getting an opportunity to spend not just duck season, but to come down to the Texas coast and fish during the spring and the summer. And at the same time, I'm learning from the guys that are taking me, learning from the Birminghams, learning from some of their running buddies. I'm learning the beginnings of a conservation ethic of especially from Jim Birmingham, learning that, these resources aren't necessarily forever. These are things that my job is to protect these. And then at the same time, I'm watching, all around North Texas, I'm watching some little, prairie remnants, lots of agricultural land, just lots of wide open spaces that you could, kind of go enjoy yourself, be plowed under, paved over, and, neighborhoods going up. Just, I mean, the breakneck pace of development in Plano in the, kind of mid to late 80s really made me it gave me some scale for how fast those resources can be turned into something else. And I think that was a kind of a light bulb moment. I've got my DU Green Wing membership, for about a year. And then I was like, no, Dad, I want like the adult magazine. And, I'm reading that thing cover to cover. I'm reading, Outdoor Life and Field and Stream and all that stuff. And just realizing this isn't just a here problem. This is all over the place. These places are in jeopardy, and there are groups of people who are trying very hard to do something about that. And that was a very interesting proposition to me, to know that I could get involved in something and make a difference and help preserve these places that I love. And so, the coast was so special. I really kind of I kept kind of narrowing my focus to, I think it doesn't matter what you're into conserving, right? Turkey, elk, quail, trout, whatever. Everything has got its own advocacy group. And so there's an avenue for you to take great effect to conserve something very specific. And I think that specificity is is extremely helpful than, you know, just trying to have one blanket organization. It's like, well, we're for preserving hunting stuff.
Yes. No, I'm 100% with you there.
Yeah.
Was there a group that you remember, like the first group that you saw when you had this light bulb moment that actually kind of like convinced you to be like, okay, now I really do want to be a member?
It was Ducks Unlimited, hands down. Yeah, I mean, everywhere you looked in the mid '80s, you know, all the ramps that we're hanging out at, the bars and restaurants that you were not bars, but the restaurants that we're going to. Although there were some bars in some of these places, you know, the parking lot would be full of trucks with DU stickers on it, and
Gotcha.
and that's, you know, I went on my first duck hunt, and it literally changed my life. I knew 10 minutes into that first morning, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life.
What gave it away? Describe that day.
Oh God, it's I am. You used to be able to buy these little disposable waders for kids, and they were basically like a trash bag with legs. I'm not kidding. They were absolute garbage. And you just put your tennis shoes on over them, and they would.
If it works, it works.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you know, they half the time they would tear, and you'd be cold and wet and miserable, and so. But even with these crappy little, you know, kind of waist high waders on. To get to this duck blind we're going to is too deep, and I'm getting a piggyback ride from my dad, and we're coming through some giant cane, and there's just a little corridor directly above me, and it's a beautiful purple and pink sunrise, and I'm on my dad's back with my head just tipped back, staring at this little stripe of sky that I can see, and there are ducks and geese and shorebirds and roseate spoonbills and all kinds of stuff just crisscrossing over me in hundreds. And that was it, dude.
I can imagine.
I was done.
That way I can imagine. Pure outdoors. That is beautiful. Have you returned back to that spot to hunt there again?
I've been to that spot a couple of times, but it has been, I'm not sure that it even exists anymore.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, this was 41 years ago.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, so from 13 and onward, what was your progression in I guess, well, this industry, or like at least in the conservation side of what you were doing?
I started getting into, I went to my first Ducks Unlimited banquet while I was still in college. And shortly after leaving Austin and moving to Frisco, Texas, that was 1997. I founded the Frisco Committee of Ducks Unlimited. And at the time, Frisco was just on the cusp of its just explosive growth. We had moved there because it was a lot cheaper than Plano at the time. It's where a young person could still buy a house. And so my wife and I and our first daughter, my ex-wife, we moved up there, and I was surprised that there wasn't a Ducks Unlimited committee. I had sent in a postcard, volunteer with Ducks Unlimited. Send in your postcard. 6 weeks later, I hear back from Jim Lillis, who was the regional director up there. He's just an outstanding guy. And he called and said, man, like the closest committee is down in Plano, and they're not super active. Like the committee's kind of dwindling a little bit. And I said, well, what do I need to do to start a committee? And he's like, oh, you need about 10 guys. And I kind of said, all right, well, I'll call you back in about a half an hour. And he chuckled, and I said, no, I'll call you back half hour tops. And, everybody that I'd grown up with has gone off to college, gotten out of college. Everybody's kind of coming back. So I just call everybody I knew in the area and, hey, you want to start a DU committee? Yeah, hell yeah, man. Let's drink some beer. And we got together and started a committee. And that committee for a little over 20 years ran really, really strong. It was a President's List committee a number of years, which are the top 100 committees in the country. How
many committees are there in total?
In the United States,
if you had to guess,
I'd be talking out of turn. But it's thousands.
I bet
it is thousands. It's there's over 100 in Texas alone.
Yeah.
And so we did some really great work. And as it works with a lot of volunteer organizations, especially where you've got the same volunteers that have just been grinding for 20 years. People start moving off. People start kind of dropping off and
complacency.
everything.
But life goes on. Like individuals and their lives. Yep. Yeah, I get that. What were some of the things that you did with that group that you were most proud of?
I think making the president's list. I mean, going from our first, it really kind of blew our minds. Our first event was at a country club, and we had maybe 150 people in the room.
Really?
And the second year, we had to overflow into a side room because we had so many people show up and buy tickets at the door.
Huh.
And from there, we had a couple of years where it was kind of a bonkers deal. Frisco still doesn't have like a convention center, but it's coming.
Uh-huh.
They've broken ground on it, but it's going to be a couple of years. So in the meantime, we're trying to find the biggest event space that we could possibly find, which turned out to be on the ice at the Stars practice arena, which is just a nuts place to have a DU banquet. It's cold.
Ducks Unlimited on ice.
It was cold as a well digger's ass in there, but they put flooring down, and we had a banquet out there on the ice, and we did that 2 years in a row. And then the Embassy Suites Conference Center opened up, and then now we're rolling. We're having 450, 500 people show up for everything, and half of it is sponsor tables, and we're raising lots of money.
Who were some of the people who helped you out the most getting it to that level of, I guess, like not prestige, but like that level of community?
I'd tell you, there's he's since moved. He's retired and moved to Arkansas. There was a guy named Ron Gills that was the area chairman of that committee for many years, and that guy, he was the linchpin. I mean, he really was the linchpin. When he decided to retire from that position because he was coasting towards retirement in his career, that's when it really he was kind of the glue that held everything together.
Really?
It became difficult to kind of keep the committee all pointed in the same direction. Jim Lillis especially, he's just. It's funny. You talk to people that have been around Texas Ducks Unlimited for a long time and DU at a national level, and you mention his name. He is extremely well thought of because he's a brilliant and very nice guy who cared passionately about DU's mission, and he was able to take all the committees that he was in charge of and get them rowing in the same direction and really do some good for fundraising for DU.
Wow, that's awesome. And then, so you kind of, I assume you're still part of that group, but then you moved on towards other stuff. Like I'm assuming.
So it's the committee had kind of, the core group of that committee had kind of broken up. It had changed hands, a bunch of new guys and everything, and I kind of rolled out of that. And then in 2023, I get an email from CCA saying that they're going to finally form a North Texas committee, and we still live in Prosper at the time. And great, because the problem with the Dallas committee is that if you're up in the northern exurbs, like McKinney or Prosper or somewhere like that, dude, that banquet is an hour and a half drive.
Yeah.
And it's not the hour and a half drive there. It's the hour and a half drive back. That's a real problem.
Yeah.
And so they're going to start a North Texas committee, which was going to be sort of, Plano, McKinney, Allen, Frisco, Prosper, Salina, that big block of northern exurbs. And I showed up at that meeting, and we had a really good group of guys, and there were a bunch of guys that sort of live on the northern periphery of Dallas that changed from Dallas to North Texas. And then I was elected president of that committee, much to my surprise. So, and then when we moved to Rockport, I was expecting to pass that position along to one of the guys in my committee named Matt Shearer. Howdy, Matt. And was informed that, no, we've all done this before. That's a lifetime position. We don't want it. So,
really?
So despite being in Rockport and being an active member of the Aransas Bay Committee, I am also the president of the North Texas Committee to this day. So.
All these accolades.
You're herding cats from 350 miles away.
I was gonna say, yeah. Well, what do you have written on that paper? What do you want to go over? Like, let's start going that way, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Yeah, I mean I listened to Pat Murray's episode for the second time yesterday while we were driving home, and he brought up that point of people can make a difference, and one of the big challenges that we face, especially here in the Middle Coast, and on the Upper Coast as well, is just industrialization writ large. And it doesn't matter what kind of industrialization that is. If it's oil and gas, plastics, chemicals, lithium refining that we've got now. All of these things that are consuming resources and taking up real estate in sensitive areas, especially oil and gas. Oil and gas is a $750 billion industry. I mean, they're enormous. They absolutely lead the way on the Texas economy. They support almost 500,000 jobs. And so it can seem like an insurmountable task to fight against them. And it's not, because the good news is there are a number of legislators in Austin who understand the outdoor recreation economy really well, that understand that that's $1.2 trillion nationwide. It's 2.3% of GDP. It's a huge part of GDP.
No, yeah.
And that's just hunting, fishing, bird watching, skiing, whatever, rock climbing, all that stuff. But, it's $56 billion in Texas, and it's 389,000 jobs in Texas. It's almost as many jobs as the oil and gas industry supports. And so when you have conservation groups, and especially you have people like in the hospitality industry that the outdoor recreation economy helps to support, that are making noise on issues, the legislators will listen. And the best example of that is the Mesquite Airs Carlos Bay closures for oysters that was recently accomplished. CCA was working very hard on that. It was being fought very hard by the oyster industry, and Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission understood that the economic impact made by harvesting oysters in those bay systems was far outweighed by the environmental consequences and the impacts to the recreational fishing economy than letting the oyster guys go in there and finish scraping those reefs into the mud.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't disagree. Sometimes I still it's still kind of upsetting that that Texas was so open to it at the very, very beginning, or still is technically open to it, right? But I never understood it. And I've had this conversation many, many times with other people, especially I think Peter Capel and I, we had a similar conversation, more so about how fast it's growing, like domestically wise. So like how many new homes are being put up on so many different islands and stuff like that nobody is taking into account how much of the runoff is affecting the environment and stuff like that, because in reality you can't see it as a whole problem. You have to look at it in terms of like a situation by situation basis. And so no, I mean, I totally agree with everything that you just said, and I think a lot of people do. What are some of the issues that you kind of wanted to address right here, right now?
Well, you touched on an excellent one that I don't even have in my notes, but it's a great observation.
Yeah, that was Peter. Yeah.
As we are developing homes along the coast, you have everything from pet waste to yard fertilizer, which collectively are known as non-point source pollution, and that is a major source of pollution for the bay. And so the more people that you have that want to live on the coast, the more important it becomes that you're using sustainable practices in your yard, that you're picking up after your dog, that you're making sure that your trash doesn't blow, because you can see this tidal lake right out the window right here. It wouldn't take much for a Whataburger wrapper to get blown down into that tidal lake if I wasn't careful with trash. So yeah, it's not just industrialization. It's just the impact of having so many people living on the coast. And Texas, we lead the way in population size increases, and a lot of those people are moving to the coast. Yeah, and a lot of them are like me. They're dudes that are a little older. They're at a point in their career that they can work remotely. They're coming down here and they intend to stay for retirement. My entire plan was always to retire here. I just happened to get here about 15 years early. That's not a bad problem to have. It's not a bad problem to have. It's funny. I remember having conversations again like this a lot when I started the podcast, and I crunched a little bit of the numbers, and I remember looking at that we had more fishermen per square mile versus I think it might have been Louisiana. And it was a pretty astonishing, how, if we really counted all the fishing licenses and everything else, granted, it's just so hard to decide how many of them are saltwater, how many are freshwater, and how many are people who just bought combo licenses and stuff. But if you just divided it by 3, you'd still get an absurd amount of people per square mile on the coast. Yeah. And it's, and recreational saltwater, just saltwater produces 1.8 billion. And then hunting is another 1.8 billion. and then freshwater fishing dwarfs the combined number.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It's because you've got everybody that's doing everything from fishing the community pond to your guys that are running fork and stuff, and there's just more of them.
Yeah.
And it's that seems hard to believe when you get out on Aransas Bay on a Saturday in June, but yeah, it's even more crowded on the freshwater stuff. Lake Texoma, we have a place up there, and between Memorial Day and Labor Day, it's not a fun lake to be on.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big late summer striper bite up there. Super fun to fish. They will hit any topwater you throw at them, but I am not exaggerating when I say you can have 150 boats in about 2 acres.
No, thank you.
On one school of stripers. It's a dumpster fire. Man. Super fun under the right circumstances, but it's fun in small doses.
Yeah. Have you actually had many chances to do the striper stuff?
Yeah. So when we lived in North Texas, spent a good bit of time fishing on Lake Texoma because it's an hour away.
Right there, yeah.
So when I couldn't be down here, and we owned a place in Rockford for almost 5 years before we moved down full time. That was one of the happiest days of my life. Was the day we closed on our place in Rockport. Now I got a place. So, but we've spent a fair amount of time, fishing up on Lake Texas.
Can you describe a little bit of that fishing? Like, I have always wanted to do it, and I've just never really had the time or the chance to go up and do it.
So it's very seasonal. So starting with that, while starting that late summer, talking about that topwater bite, you get very, very large schools of fish. They're usually in the middle of that lake near Preston Point. They can go as far to the east as the dam. They'll go as far west as about the Willis Bridge, which is the only bridge that goes across that lake, north to south. And then as the weather starts to cool off, those fish start getting a little deeper. In the winter, they start running towards the mouth of the Red River because they're headed up there to spawn. So your fishing shifts further west on the lake. It gets to a very slow presentation called dead sticking, which is exactly what it sounds like. You're just letting the boat drift. You've got a big sassy shad, 3-4 inch sassy shad on like 1.5 ounce, 2 ounce jig head, and you'll get that thing down. You want to find fish on your sonar. When you see them on the sonar, you figure out what depth they're at. You kind of count off to pulling line up to your first guide is about 18 inches, and just figuring out how to get that bait down right in front of them, and then you just hang it, and and just the motion of the boat that will give that sassy shad just a little slow wiggle on the tail, and you'll get an eat.
Really?
And then as you start coming back into warmer weather, into the spring and stuff, then it's more vertical presentation. But you're using jigs now. You're using jigging spoons. Just a big heavy jig that you drop straight down. Usually you're coming 2 or 3 cranks off the bottom and just jigging that thing up and down until you get a hit. It's very similar to the technique that you would use on ice fishing. And then that lasts, into the summer. You can also use live bait on them too.
Yeah, no, it's funny that you mentioned dead sticking. Like, kind of, it sounds. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but one of the hardest things for me to comprehend was when I started doing the tarpon stuff on the rocks. And at the time, I didn't have much help. I didn't know who to ask. And so the first person I'd ask was like Larry Haynes, and then one of my buddies, Marcus Montalvo. And Marcus had basically explained, he was like, when you're really fishing that fly, double hand strip, like, you're basically crawling it on the bottom of the sand. Like, you almost essentially hope that this, again, you want to think that the fish picks it off at the ground. What's actually happening is the line's sinking, sitting, and the fly's just barely moving with the current.
Right.
And it was hard to comprehend because, like, man, this water's moving and everything. It doesn't make any sense. Like, but no, he's hit plenty of big fish on the rocks. And so, I mean, I jumped quite a few doing that stuff too. So it was quite interesting to kind of start to see it work. And it's funny because that reminds me, it sounds very similar to some of the stuff that not friend, but someone I know, Randy Richter, was doing when he caught his first paddlefish last year, which is all just kind of letting the water do everything for you. You're not really doing much of stuff.
Right.
So I think that's super, super cool.
Yeah, it's and I've never fished for paddlefish. I've seen one person doing it, and you're exactly right. It's an extremely slow presentation. It is not the most exciting fishing in the world, but that's when the record fish are caught.
Yeah.
So you're trading that, awesome slot fish, topwater action for the chance to maybe catch a 20+ pound striper.
Yeah, that's one of my. It sounds silly, but that is one of my goals is to do the striper stuff and land a big one.
Yeah, and it's I've never done it in saltwater. I would love to do it in saltwater. I would love to see how that kind of Chesapeake Bay program, because it's funny how much different the techniques are for catching those fish than it is for catching them in Lake Texoma. Same fish in just wildly different ways to catch them.
That's actually another really good point. But I think it all just evolves around the idea of stronger currents, moving water, stuff like that. But it's funny, Matt Simpson said the exact same thing about coastal gar and inland gar, and how inland gar will be lower. They'll be essentially not belly crawling, but they'll be looking for more common or carp and whatnot on the sides and stuff. And the ones that have faster reactions and actions are actually the saltwater fish that are used to faster moving fish.
Right.
So it's like it is really cool to see like a dichotomy there.
What I understand is that those East Coast, saltwater stripers it's a much more violent strike, and it's a harder fight than what you get out of the freshwater fish. And the freshwater fish fight plenty good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like yanking, brim out.
Yeah. Man, now I'm actually like kind of amped on that. I do want to check it out. But one of the things that you had sent me beforehand, and I don't know, do you want to start with talking a little bit about the redfish wars that you were able to pick up on, or do you want to maybe talk about the problems like the river dam and stuff like that first?
So we're skipping around that first part and coming back.
What part? Sorry.
When I talk about redfish wars,
you can say it into the mic. I want to know. I thought maybe you had another part to that.
No, that was kind of the extent of.
Oh, okay, then that's fine. I mean, this part was no big deal. Yeah. Okay, so then let's go towards the Lavaca River Dam and stuff like that.
Yeah. So the Lavaca River is the last free-flowing river in Texas. Everything else has got some kind of water control structure, dam, impoundment, something on it, and the Lavaca River doesn't, and that's owing to the fact that the Lavaca River is fairly short. Mm-hmm. And so the Lavaca-Navidad River District has requested permitting to do a cofferdam impoundment, and a cofferdam is a dam that you build up just to a certain height that is supposed to allow water to go over it, but that only happens when it's been raining and the rivers are running right. So not now.
Yeah.
And so they want to do a cofferdam impoundment on the Lavaca River, and it's going to divert 96,022 acre feet of water a year, which is about 31 billion gallons of water.
Okay, that's still hard enough. I can't even think of that number. So.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of water. So 31 billion gallons of freshwater inflow that would be cut off from Lavaca Bay, which of course feeds into Maddie, and the loss of that freshwater inflow would be catastrophic for that bay. Mm-hmm. Those estuaries are the most productive waters in the world. Mm-hmm. That's where the magic happens. That's where all of your inshore species and some offshore species are, raising their babies. That's where the babies are coming up. That's exactly right. It's the nursery. And if you damage those, they're heavily dependent on those freshwater inflows. And if you damage that, you destroy the estuary and you destroy the health and the motility of your bay. And so this is a pretty major problem. And we were able to get with State Senator Kolkhorst and a big lift from Shane Bonneau at CCA. We were able to get enough comments suspended. Senator Kolkhorst is the one who requested a public meeting, and that combined with a good influx of negative public commentary forced a public meeting on this thing, where we learned a lot of really interesting stuff about the intentions for this thing. So you have right there at Point Comfort, you have a Formosa plastics plant, and they're an enormous polluter. That's not an opinion. That is a fact.
Yes.
Those guys lost a $50 million judgment to a woman named Diane Wilson, who was a former shrimper. And she sued Formosa for discharging nurdles and plastic waste into the bay. And she won $50 million.
Yeah.
So that is, like I said, it's not my opinion, it's a fact. And so part of that judgment was that Formosa agreed to a zero discharge mandate. From here on out, you guys are not going to let a single nurdle or piece of plastic pollution into the bay.
Okay.
They have violated that 700 times.
Really?
And that has only cost them $23 million.
Wow.
So
Wow.
it is the fines are such a just rounding error problem to them that they just pay them.
Man, I've said that multiple times, and I think I had mentioned that with Chuck Nizer actually about the oyster stuff too, where it was like I used the analogy of Nike and Jordan, and when they first brought out the Jordan shoe, they were like, or the NBA was like, yo, like you can't use the shoe, and how much the fine? 15 grand. Oh, okay.
Yep.
So no, I totally agree with you there. So the intentions you were saying.
Yeah. So the intention for that water is to feed that Formosa plastic plant.
Oh.
Somebody stood up and asked, is there any municipal benefit to this diversion? Is this going to help? Is this going to help ranchers keep tanks full? No. Is this going to lower water rates for taxpayers, for ratepayers? No. Will ratepayers receive any of this water? No. It is for Formosa Plastics. They are going to dam, if they get their way, they're going to dam the Lavaca River to feed water to the most prolific polluter of that bay.
Gee, you know, I'd heard a story from Logan Crane actually. There was like a small river nearby or something nearby Formosa or whatever, and they had polluted it to like a pretty insane degree. And then what they did is they ended up changing the name of the river to then like basically like deny that they had ever actually done it. Something along those lines. I don't know if that strikes like any memories or anything.
Nothing surprises me anymore. If that turned out to be true, it would not surprise me in the slightest. Texas has got a very bad habit of rushing headlong towards industrial development.
Oh, LNG, yes. I'm on the fence and I'm not on the fence. Like I see both sides of it, but what worried me the most was the presentation of LNG at the very, very beginning in Sal Padre. Granted, I don't really know much about the LNG up north, but what I'm talking about is what I kind of know. And I was actually talking to Daniel Wise on the phone when I had this conversation, and he kind of basically also agreed that when we first saw that SpaceX had gotten like the permits and everything, they were coming down to Brownsville and whatnot. It was almost like, oh, okay, like this is good. This is gonna kind of like satiate the financial income that would have came from something like LNG. And then all of a sudden, like it was like a 9-year battle, like 2 months later, it gets just thwarted and LNG also gets accepted there. It was like, come on, man. It's frustrating to see stuff like that.
Yeah, and you have the Harbor Island VLCC terminal, which is it's the project that won't die. Port of Corpus Christi been pushing that thing for a long time, and it now looks like it still may happen. You may have VLCCs, 1,000-foot crude carriers parked right there next to Port Aransas. It's where they're talking about siting a desalination plant.
Really?
And it looks like maybe a little progress has been made into coaxing them into taking both the intake and the outlet offshore instead of discharging it into Corpus Christi Bay, which would be a disaster. So yeah, I mean, and then, right here in the coastal bend, especially in the Corpus Christi area where there is a ton of industrialization, fortunately, Rockport has managed to largely keep this kind of stuff at bay. But in Corpus Christi, the short-sightedness is it's just mind-boggling how they will just invite these heavy industrial companies in. And it's not that I have anything against them in particular, other than the fact that it's like, oh, well, this plant's going to use 500,000 gallons of water a day. From where?
Yeah. Yeah.
Corpus Christi is out of water. They're out of water. They're, the two lakes that feed Corpus Christi right now are sitting at something like 20 or 19%
Jesus
of capacity between the two of them, because the two lakes that they have are in one of the dumbest watersheds in Texas. I mean, you've got your two your two lakes that feed that area are parked out between here and Big Bend where it never rains. So good. It's a very well-designed watershed. Yeah. Nothing could possibly go wrong there. They're talking about, Corpus Christi's talking about, reinvigorating some older wells. So they're going to start sticking straws down into what's left of the aquifer here. I mean, you're just out of water. You're out of water.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, let's keep bringing in these industrial companies that use as much as half of the municipal rate of Corpus Christi per day.
I feel like that's just like it's a civil issue, is what it seems like. It just seems like it's what's bullshit, really. I'm put it be bluntly, like
it is. It's this, a lot of this stuff. Everybody's. A lot of the transparency rules that are meant to guard against this stuff are rendered null and void by the fact that certain state permitting agents are just a green light to anything. I mean, it's rare to see something from one of the permitting agencies be declined.
I remember seeing some representative of like central on the central coast, or he was in Austin, right? But what had happened was there was something. It's not that I remember the actual thing itself, but it was the way that I saw him react to it, because he was an elected official, and it was people were up in arms about something that has to do with a very similar concept, and he went on Twitter and he goes, all these people who are telling me that I shouldn't be like advocating for this, and he got all play. He was like, y'all are just a bunch of liberals and whatever, and and it was like, what?
It is. It's our politics at a state level has gotten extremely
childish.
It's gotten extremely stupid.
Yeah.
It's. I saw another state representative from the Houston area that loudly proclaimed on Twitter that it was now obvious that Texas Parks and Wildlife had been overrun by global warming liberals, and it's just. Man, I don't even know what to do with pejorative like that. It's beneath me.
Yeah, it's hard to have a real conversation when especially with people who you at one point wanted to have that spot, to fill that role. It's like, you just let me down. It's like, oh
yeah, when reality has left the chat, we're not having a chat anymore.
Yeah,
the fact of the matter is that Texas Parks and Wildlife is an outstanding wildlife agency. And that the Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission is filled with people who honestly give a great big shit about what happens in this state and are working towards protecting our resources. And a lot of times they're at loggerheads with, some of the permitting agencies in Austin. And there's not Parks and Wildlife is going to lose.
Yes.
If something is not directly in their sphere of influence, if they're just trying to, influence, for instance, industrialization, if they're trying to interject that, here are the environmental consequences of this, a lot of times they're simply ignored. It's exactly right. They get bulldozed, and they get bulldozed because the money is too big for Texas to ignore.
Do you think that that's because Texas doesn't give Texas Parks and Wildlife the legal authority they deserve to then impose harder sanctions or harder I'm gonna say tariffs, but like harder like penalties?
Sure. Yeah. No, that's an interesting question. I don't know. There are so many different agencies that have so many, little tracks that they mind. You've got the Railroad Commission, Texas Council on Environmental Quality, you've got the water guys, you've got, everybody, and where I think Parks and Wildlife does a great job, with the law enforcement that we have, across the state. And doesn't matter if you're getting stopped here on the water here in Aransas Bay, or if you're getting, your shotgun checked, shooting cranes up in the Panhandle. Those are largely very professional, very courteous interactions, and those guys are there to do the right thing. They're not there to, be your enemy. But there are so many agencies. I just don't know. I'm just not educated enough to hazard a guess on how much more enforcement capacity Parks and Wildlife would be capable of without stepping outside of their mandate. I would love to see. The problem is things that you would think are just a Parks and Wildlife issue, like plastic litter in the bay. Well, now you've got the EPA, you've got the Coast Guard.
So many toes stepping over toes. Everyone wants to share the pie. That's basically the problem. Therein lies the true problem.
Yeah, you have so much cross agency stuff, and we just recently had a CCA Anglers Night Out here in Rockport, and the commander from Station Corpus Christi, Coast Guard Station Corpus Christi, came over to talk about the launcher problem. And the launches are these
the dinghies.
Yeah, they're the cartel driven
with kilos.
They're
and shit
pangas.
like that,
They're pangas that come over the border and fish our waters primarily for red snapper. A lot of bycatch too. And they're putting a huge dent in the biomass of Texas. And the very interesting thing about that conversation was they were talking about how superb enforcement is in state waters. It's so good that the launches don't come to state waters anymore, because if you get stopped by Texas Parks and Wildlife, you are going to jail. They are going to take your stuff. Like there are serious financial repercussions. Like you do not want to get popped in Texas state waters. But if you're in federal waters,
Coast Guard territory.
It's Coast Guard territory. Coast Guard's doing everything they can. They've only got a couple of boats out there.
And there's so much more water to cover too. Yeah.
Massive piece of water. They just don't have the resources. And the federal rules prevent them from jailing those guys.
Really?
So it's a catch and release program. And so I had asked the question, so what needs to happen to give federal water enforcement some teeth? And Parks and Wildlife and Coast Guard guys are all looking at one another and looking at me and looking at one another and like, you need to talk that over with your legislators.
Yeah.
And there is some effort being made to try to put some teeth to federal enforcement. But right now there's a big delta, and that's illustrative of this problem where you have all these different agencies that have these little bitty
red tape, all this red tape.
Yeah, they have these little bitty silos that they operate in, and it works. Sometimes it can work at cross purposes or to the detriment of the resource.
Yeah, I've mentioned a little bit in regards to looking at Sal Padre, Lower Laguna Madre versus I think it's I call it the 7th Pass, which is south, and you could see the Lower Laguna Madre, the true Lower Laguna Madre, which belongs to Mexico, and it's crazy how easily they were able to destroy that fishery is what I'm trying to get to. Like you look at it on Google Maps, you see nothing but just trot line. You'd go a little bit south to the pass, you see the lines that go up and out for like a mile, come back. Like it is unbelievable what unregulation or like the lack of regulation in something like that can do.
Yeah, there is no enforcement. There is no really solid environmental policy, fisheries policy in Mexico, which is the reason the launches come to our waters, because we do manage our stuff well.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of torches and pitchforks when it comes to the subject of red snapper management. But regardless of what you think of our current red snapper management practices, the fact remains we have a shitload more red snapper than Mexico does, and that's because we manage better than they do. So, yeah, that's you. It's the viral host, right?
Yeah.
They've eaten up one host and now they're looking for another one.
Quite literally. Do you have any personal opinions on redfish snapper management?
I don't.
I was wondering.
Not an offshore guy.
Okay. Well, so back to the river dam. You mentioned it is a problem, and the fact that having a public meeting about it just showed how ludicrous it really was. Do you think that in and of itself is already enough to garner enough attention to, again, gross mismanagement to then thwart this?
So a lot depends on the folks that listen to this podcast. I mean, the people that listen to podcasts like this are usually the ones that are super engaged in conservation, that are engaged in, policy discussions, that are active social media users, that are the kind of people that will get in touch with their state representatives and will show up at Parks and Wildlife Commission meetings. I've made a ton of friends here in Rockport. You talk about Pete Capel, he's one of them. And
Great guy.
It's just from showing up at, Parks and Wildlife presentations about oyster policy, or when we were looking at changing trout regs after the big freeze, everything from the moratorium to permanent changes to trout regulations. And these guys show up, Wes McNew, Chris Fowler, like all these guys.
Great guys.
Another one of your guests, Tom Pennington. He was at the LNRA meeting. So it's at Steve Branch. Like, there's just so many guys that are active and care and show up, and that's the most important thing. That's what I would encourage everybody to do. If you care, if you want to make a difference, your voice can be heard. All you got to do is show up. You don't even have to do any public speaking. You can just show up. There'll be a card or a piece of paper that you can fill out to lodge your, support or
comments or concerns.
And those get read, and they do move the needle, especially with organizations like Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission. That's how we got the Mac Bay closure, was because of overwhelming public sentiment that wild oyster harvest in those bay systems was tragically wrong.
Yeah.
Because we had Flatsworthy has an excellent set of videos on YouTube that show the historic degradation of the reefs around the Mac Bay complex.
Really?
And the prominence that those reefs used to have, that even at high tide, they were 2 feet out of the water. And now you can't even find them on Google, Google Earth. So it's, that was a slam dunk, because enough people were mad enough to show up and to voice their opinions and to try to move the needle on policy. Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission, the first and second meeting that we had on that, on the closures, there were hundreds of people there. And that does not happen for a Parks and Wildlife Commission meeting.
Who do you think was responsible for garnering so much of a communal aspect there?
It's all the guys I just named.
Oh, no, but I meant like I guess I was asking you to choose between like TPWD and Flatsworthy and stuff like that. I thought maybe there was someone who started it first, but
it was CCA, it was Flatsworthy, it was all the guys that I just named. This was a big
group effort.
There was a big group effort, and so me and Pete and Wes and all these guys were all talking to each other, coordinating posts on social media every time. And then CCA is dispensing incredible information about how harmful mechanical dredging is and how important oysters are and all of the ecosystem services that they provide. And so we're reposting those graphics in concert so that we're reaching a really broad audience. I mean, I have a fraction of the followers that Pete does through his Skiff Wanderer Instagram
project,
profile.
yes.
Yeah. And, but just amplifying one another, reposting one another, that helped really get the word out. And so, and I get it. It's exhausting. That was a year of work to get to the result that we got to. And being that pissed off about something is hard it's hard to sustain.
Yes.
But that's kind of the price that has to be paid. Do it with good humor. You don't want to be shaking your fist at the sky and screaming at clouds, but you have to maintain that sense of urgency.
It has to give you drive. Yeah.
Yeah. But you can make a difference. You can make a difference. And I think that's the most important thing about conservation organizations, is that it gives you that highway to channel to channel the effort and to channel the anger towards some of the things that are happening to the resource.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree at all. Now, is there, do you think that there is a solution in this first issue where both parties walk away at least semi-happy?
Are you talking about the Lavaca River Dam? Yeah, no, I don't.
Really?
No. And I would love nothing more than to piss Formosa off. I want to shatter their hopes and dreams.
I respect it. I respect it.
Sorry. And that's a very impolitic answer. And it's
raw. It's true. It's real.
It's not something that you're going to get from somebody who's speaking for a conservation organization in an official capacity, but I feel comfortable saying it.
Okay.
Yeah. The amount of damage that those clowns have already done to that bay, they deserve nothing but disappointment. And I hope they don't get 1 ounce of that water.
Okay. No, I mean, I'm right there with you 100%. The other thing that you and I want to talk about is kind of an issue that has kind of already, so you mentioned it's been kind of subsiding a little bit.
Yeah.
But I do want to go over it. So please go for it.
Yeah. So the Port Mansfield container port, like what a I can't imagine whatever was consumed before having that idea. I'd like an ounce or two of it. So they were looking at putting a container ship port in Port Mansfield, which the port can do because they control the majority of the real estate there, and so through some maybe less than above board maneuvering, it was put in place, the real estate, to build a port container. And the port signed a lease for operations with a firm called North American Standards, which is a really odd duck because they don't have a physical address.
I wanted you to go over that. Yes.
Yeah.
Describe what that property looks like.
Yeah. So the company they contracted with to run this port is just a big flat pad kind of on the north side of the port. And the North American Standards company they contracted with, they have no address. There's no way to contact them other than a PO box. The owner, or one of the principals, was sued for breach of contract by Hidalgo County. He was convicted of embezzling, and he's on a 10-year suspended sentence in Cameron County. So this is really, I can't wait to jump in bed with these guys. It seems like a great business deal. A superb opportunity for an enterprising guy trying to open a container port in Port Mansfield, where nobody wants one. Yeah. And so that contract included a $1,400 a month lease payment from North American Standards. And they are over $10,000 they were over $10,000 in arrears, and that they never paid a penny. The big one, and what kind of tied a bow around this, was they were supposed to chip in $3 million for capital improvements to help, basically begin construction on this container terminal, and they never came up with a penny. Every time that they tried to have a public meeting with these guys would not show up.
So these were just ghosts, essentially. No one knew. There's no faces to this project.
This is, like Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, that's Jason Bourne. You know what I mean? It's just weird. Everything about it was weird. It smelled to high heaven. The port itself was just an absolute, it is one of the dumbest ideas ever come up with. P.S. These are not full-size container ships. These are the small container ships. And what are you going to import? Mexican pottery? What's the plan here, boys? Yeah. So finally, there was an election in November. There was a new commissioner elected, a new chairman elected. And at the end of the year, the North American Standards had until the end of the year to square up with the port, which they did not. They didn't produce one penny. And the port terminated that contract on January the 8th. So, so one of the things I wanted to talk about was to make people aware that they're trying to build a container port in Port Mansfield, and this is something that you should be concerned about. And it hopefully has turned out to be a self-righting ship.
Yes.
The problem with projects like this is just like the Harbor Island VLCC terminal. They're zombies. You can think that you have killed them. And 2 years later,
another permit.
You will find out another. That's exactly right. The permits are what, those are the canaries in the coal mine. That's what gives these projects away. So fortunately, people that are much smarter than me keep an eye out for these under the radar permit applications. And so, Port Mansfield is going to have to be watched for a decade.
Yeah, like vigilantly.
Yeah, absolutely. To make sure that nobody's trying to sneak anything in there. There could be a permit application in. There has been no public comment period announced for it or anything, but there might be a permit in for bulkhead improvements at that part of the harbor, which would be a red flag.
Yeah,
so
of course.
You have to that's the one thing that you got to understand about the way that these projects work. These guys never give up. Yeah. You can't kill their projects and then wipe your hands and think,
I'm good.
Yeah, we got it. Yeah. That's a completely different process than, having 3 tiny little sub bays closed down to oyster harvest.
Yeah.
That is permanent. This stuff just trickles.
It's just temporary.
Yeah, it just trickles through these permitting agencies just over and over and over again as they try to kill you by 1,000 cuts.
Yes. might be an interesting question. Do you think that in this scenario, even though technically it would have just been considered a lesser evil, it would be better to have seen a growth like Corpus Christi in Port Mansfield? So what I'm saying is, I'm presenting the argument of, would it also have been better to have all the houses that we just talked about with the runoff and stuff like that? You can't really, you can't really account for. Would it be better to have that versus something like this? I'm asking you to pick the lesser of two evils just for the sake of doing it.
Oh my God. I think you would have a very difficult time finding anyone in Port Mansfield that would support either of those propositions. They're small, they're awesome, and they're happy doing it. And I think any kind of large scale growth like that would just get fought tooth and nail. And
but the fact of the matter is, like we just said, it's temporary. It's going to happen one way or another.
Maybe. I mean, it's a dumb place for a port.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too.
You got to dredge all the way through Padre Island, to get anything deep enough to get any meaningful ship traffic in there. It's going to annihilate the quality of life. You're going to take a very quiet, little fishing village, and turn it into a heavily
hustling, bustling.
It's so compact, right? Like it's literally. Imagine having a container ship parked right out in my front yard. Right,
literally, that's exactly what it'd be like. Yes.
Yeah. So I would like to say I never see it coming, but I saw an article while I was kind of brushing up on the Port Mansfield stuff that now they're trying to do like 100-acre solar farm out there, which is enough power that it's like half of one of the small nuclear reactors. It's enough to power Harlingen.
Yes.
It's hundreds of times more power than they actually need in Port Mansfield. And the question is, to what end? Because the transmission infrastructure there does not exist to move that power anywhere.
Yes, no, 100% too. That's always been an issue that I've always learned, or I learned was an issue with green energy too, is the transportation, losing energy as it travels.
You're always going to have these little, and it's ports seem to be little notorious defenders. Offenders. You're always going to have some tin pot dipshit that's going to have some trumped up idea like this that doesn't make any sense, but it lines his pockets, and that's all he cares about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of the issue that's like the main issue in everything that we've talked about.
100%. Yeah. And I love money. I love it. I've got some. I'd like to have more.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna pour lead in the bay. Because it'll make me $1 million.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree at all. The only good thing I can see of something like that, where they just dredging, not actually building this, but just the dredging, is the potential creation for new areas, like new spoils and stuff like that. Like I visited this topic with Tim O'Brien about the LNG port, and about they wanted to deepen the jetties, and then they wanted to create another bridge, which they're planning to do at the end of like this decade. And that is the only thing that I can see, aside from obviously lack of traffic, which would be very, very nice, but that is the only good thing that I can see that can come out of it. And I'm still here crossing my fingers that they don't do something dumb again, like put it on the beach side in the front. Like that to me was just the stupidest thing you could have ever done with all that really good land that we had just excavated that was just pure sand. But it's amazing how frequently we have to have a discussion about what to do with dredge material when dredging needs to happen, because they always want to do something dumb with it to start with, until environmental groups step in and we could actually use that. Don't go nourish the beach with it. Beneficial dredge should be the default. Yeah. Right. You, honestly, maybe what you should do is you should start a club or like a group or an advocacy group about how much you love ospreys and birds. Okay. And then you're going to be like, yo, like, I think that this land could be used for an osprey hatchery.
That'd be Nature Conservancy and Audubon. Yeah. And even Ducks Unlimited to a certain extent. There was Ducks Unlimited did participate in a marsh creation down around Dagger Island, I believe.
Really?
That's just been here fairly recently. That And it's
what do you mean? This whole thing was created recently, like a whole new island.
no, they were just re-nourishing.
Okay.
Erosion
Yes.
here is a major problem.
Yes,
And so it's just sort of undoing some erosion of some of the Rookery Islands, and kind of creating some cuts to have marshes and to get marsh to reestablish. And that dredge material was from the Port of Corpus Christi.
Mm. Well, see, I mean, like stuff like that gives me hope for that.
Yeah, I mean, when you're taking dredge material from an already industrialized area, yeah, that's make it beneficial and keep on keeping on.
Yes.
It's when you're talking about putting a container port in Port Mansfield that I get a little twitchy.
Yes. There's a saying that goes, if you stare long enough into the void will stare back.
The void stares back.
Right? Someone like you who's seen both sides of the aisle in terms of success and having to fight and feeling like you could be losing a harder, or you could be losing this fight. Is there more hope or more like sigh, more like about what you see in the future for Texas outdoors?
I think it is a more hopeful situation now than it was 20 or 30 years ago. And I think a lot of that, I only have a social media presence on Instagram. I think a lot of it is just a toxic wasteland, and like I avoid Facebook like the plague. But social media is an excellent place to disseminate information. And when you are dealing with trusted sources, when you're getting your information from the conservation organizations that you believe in, when you're getting it from state scientific agencies, when you're getting it from people like Shane Bonneau, he's not only does he have a very broad base of knowledge on conservation issues, he's just an excellent communicator.
That's a really good way to put it. Yes, I completely agree.
He has a way of making very complex interagency, interactions digestible.
Yes.
And so
compartmentalizing, but yes, I completely.
Yeah. And then you take that and you take it with the amplification that can happen on social media to get everybody pointed at a problem, and now they've had it explained to them in a factual and generally dispassionate way. Now you can start taking the steps that are required to move the needle on conservation policy. You can get your local legislators involved. You can write public comments for the permitting agencies. You can show up at these meetings for things like LNRA when they had the public meeting. Be there. Take a few hours out of your day. You're going to meet some really cool people that are, as engaged as you are. A lot of them are very serious, very good anglers, and you can make really cool friends. You can do important things, and all that's required is just a little bit of engagement from you.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's funny. I used to think that the age of camaraderie in Texas was coming to an end when I was like probably 18 to 21, because I always felt like it was so cliquey. Mm-hmm. It was really hard to always meet new people, and I feel like since I've done this podcast and I've been able to meet so many people and I hear so many names recurring and stuff like that, it makes me really glad to know that there still is a lot more than I would have ever expected. I think maybe the reason why I thought that was because how big Texas is and how far, like how spread so many people that are like-minded really are. It's hard to get so many people like that together consistently and create such a powerful voice or like a force within this like semi-legislative and also environmental ecosystem, if you will.
Yeah, and the great thing about especially the coastal bend, for the upper coast, you've got Houston at your back, right? You have a gigantic well of money and engagement and people that care about that section of the resource. And here for the coastal bend, we're fortunate to have San Antonio and Austin at our back. The Austin CCA committee is just a marvel.
Really,
the number of people that a couple of thousand people show up for their banquet. It's enormous.
Wow.
It is a massive production. They do a great job. Hundreds and hundreds of people here in Corpus Christi. That's a massive banquet. CCA Aransas Bay has sold their venue out as long as I can remember. Like the only constraint they have on the number of people that show up for their banquet is the capacity of the venue itself. And and you have people that are coming from out of town to attend these events and, to put their money where their mouth is, right here where the resource is. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a really broad base of people, and it's fly fishermen, and it's guys that drown bait, and it's freshwater fishermen sometimes. And it's just,
It's watermen.
yeah, that's exactly right. It's just watermen. And we all get along. Now,
Yeah.
I might get made fun of for soaking shrimp every once in a while, but I don't give a shit.
Well, you shouldn't have told me that right now. Well, I mean, is there anything else you want to kind of go over, or you're good there?
Yeah,
I feel like we went over a lot. We definitely did.
We covered some ground.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then, with that being said, we can start closing it out. Oh man, actually, I'm gonna ask one more question.
Yeah.
Is there any moment we talked about your first moment the time with your dad and stuff like that and whatnot, but is there any moment that you've had out here in Texas that is special to your heart that you kind of remind yourself about whenever you may be finding yourself to be a little bit, tired or exhausted from consistently always trying to be at the forefront of defending the ecosystem?
That's easy. Every time I put the boat in the water.
That's not the right answer. You gotta get a better answer than that.
Yeah,
I know you have a better. I feel like you have a really good answer.
I'm telling you, I am so happy every time I put the boat in the water here. I feel so lucky and so fortunate to have been able to pull this off.
Yeah.
To get out of Dallas and get away from that stress and get away from constantly chasing every possible penny. To parlay our successes, my wife and I, to parlay our successes up there into the ability to come down here and live full time and to live in the middle of the resource that we love. That's what fuels me. Is every time I go out, every red, every sunrise and sunset, and every cold Shiner Bock out of the cooler in the back of the boat is just a little. It's like my first duck hunt. It's just a little exclamation point.
Yes.
That make me that.
The little
they
outliers.
Give me the fuel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's yeah. I mean, every day.
That's good. I like that answer. Okay. Now to close it out, I always ask those same two questions, and I feel like, you've heard the podcast, so you know what I'm gonna ask. But the first question is again, looking back at the things that you've done, and obviously you interpersonally, but also with the things that you've done in the communal aspect. Is there anything you wish you would have done differently?
During my D years, I might have been a little difficult to get along with some of the people at National. I tended to ask very difficult questions about things like them firing E. Donald Thomas Jr. because he took DU's. He wrote the back page of DU magazine for years and years and years. And DU fired him because he got sideways with DU's biggest donor, because DU's biggest donor was trying to have public access to Montana streams.
Really?
Yeah, it was and I was team E. Donald Thomas Jr.
I don't even know who he is, and I'm on that team too.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, I might have limited my upward mobility with Ducks Unlimited. I served 3 terms as the state social media chairman. I was on a good trajectory in state leadership until I pissed off the wrong people.
Hey, at least you had your voice heard. You got to respect it.
It's funny. I won't say his name, but it was the guy that gave me my first crack at the state leadership committee. He called me laughing. He's like, "God damn it, Brian, you can learn when to keep your mouth shut." Yeah, nice. That was a skill I was in my late 40s before I acquired.
Oh, nice. Well, okay. The last question is, in regards to speaking to like the younger generation of kids coming into the industry or just into the fishery, just the outdoors in and of itself, is there any piece of advice that you could give them for, I guess you could say, success within said industry?
Yeah, I have a very good friend, Dr. Robert Neal, up in Frisco. And he has a great quote. And he's like, dude, I'm going to bet on me every time. Like every single time.
I like that.
And so bet on you. And it doesn't matter in what capacity you're doing that. If you are wanting to make a huge impact in conservation, then set your sights on that, bet on yourself, and get in there and start fighting. If you want to be, an advocate and an influencer on social media for the resources, do that. But you have to, a lot of people half-ass a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And you can't, you've got to knuckle down. You've got to bet on yourself. You've got to know that you can make a difference or that you can succeed. And that, to me, it's a great piece of advice. It's one that, in both my conservation life and my professional life, I constantly lean on. You got to bet on you. Anytime I feel any little moment of self-doubt, bet on yourself. And sometimes it bites you in the ass. I mean,
I remember.
It's just the way that works.
I remember when I first had thought about the idea of doing this podcast, and I remember thinking, man, like, I feel like someone's going to do it eventually. Like, I'll just let them do it. And then I remember, I was talking with Rick, and he was telling me some cool stories. And it was just one of those things where it was like, man, like, these are stories that, and obviously he didn't tell those on the podcast, but I was like, these are stories that like very few people ever get to listen to. And I'm sitting here with a phenomenal opportunity to actually do something and see if I can. And I remember the first thing I bought was the Shure SM7B microphone, and it was $300 on Facebook Marketplace. And I remember thinking, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. And I decided, I was like, all right, like quite literally, I was like, I have to just bet on myself on this one. Like, I'm not going to expect anyone else to do it, and I'm not saying that it's successful or anything, but like, I am so glad that I did, because I get to talk to people like you. I get to talk to people who I think I would have never met in my entire life, maybe on Instagram once or twice, but people I've never would have met, because I'm, putting myself out there in regards to going out and doing stuff like this, almost kind of like the way that you alluded to, going to chapter meetings, going to stuff like this, showing up, showing face, lets you build your own sense of community, which I kind of tying it back to earlier. I think that was one of the biggest problems, is I never felt like I had a sense of community because I never really put myself in the scenario to do so. Yeah.
And the people that you have on the show, that's a community. There are so many amazing stories from the Texas coast. There are a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me and have a lot more interesting stories. And but the idea to go and document all those, to make basically an oral history of the Texas coast, it's an amazing idea, and it's very interesting. All the episodes are great, and one of the things that you realize as you're listening to all these episodes, something that you talked about, is how interwoven.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of us are.
Makes you more proud.
Yeah, we don't all know each other, but we all know some of us.
Yeah.
And it's just the way that everything is so interwoven, and especially the people that you're targeting as guests, they're the people that are really pulling hard to keep the good places good places.
Yes.
They understand the value of what they have. They care greatly about it, and they do the work to make those places safe from the people that would ruin them. And there are people that would sell out every friggin' acre for a dime.
Oh, every inch, for sure. All right. Well, last thing before we cut it off, what do you think about the book?
Oh, the book is outstanding. God, dude, I told you when you got here, it was the most hilarious coincidence. We get back from Fredericksburg yesterday, and there's the box, and I open that box up, and I just kind of let that book fall open, and it fell open to the black and white picture of Fowler's hands. And I was like, honey, look at these bear paws right here. She's like, oh my God, is that Chris's hands? I was like, yeah.
That's so funny.
First thing that I opened it up to. Yeah, it's such an incredible collection of talent. And you and I have spoken about how much I admire Mac Elliott's talent.
Absolutely. She wrote a story for it too. Yeah.
Yeah. And she's just such a sweetie. And I like her a lot. I like her artwork a lot.
Yeah. Hey, you're good.
And it's a must have. I mean, it really is a must have. A lot of the collectible books are in the case behind you there.
Yes.
And then it's John Callens and Herb Booths and, stuff like that. And that book belongs in that stack.
Those are really nice words. I mean, I really appreciate it. It's funny you mentioned that story about the Chris's hands thing. Well, Chris now is the only person so far. I have to go distribute, but he's the first person I've distributed books to. So now he's the first. Like he has like I think 12 right now. But it's kind of cool. It's funny you mentioned that story, and then that happens. I don't know.
So available at the Fly Trap
right now,
in Rockport,
yes.
Texas.
Right now. I mean, I don't know if they're going to be gone by then. But I mean, with that being said, I mean, I think we covered everything. I've had an absolute blast doing this. We got to go take your portrait picture. So
oh boy,
let's get on out of here.
All right.